under fading skies. Tattered flags waving dreams in our eyes. The crowds roar like a storm on the wind. We're the underdogs fighting again.
What's going on, guys? Good afternoon and welcome into the program. It is yet another edition, the Sunday edition, like it always is, every single Sunday of It's Football, Not Soccer. Of course, I'm your host today, Steve Silver, and of course, the legendary Tottenham Hotspur supporter personified. He is the legend, the legendary Dermatron. Of course, you guys know him from THFC, Tottenham Till We Die. Good afternoon, Derma. How you doing today, bud?
I'm all right. I'm over yesterday. We move on. We got Wednesday, but I think there's a bit to talk about it. But look, it is what it is. It's only game week 1. It's not like it's game week 37. So, but look, looking forward to the podcast again, talking all things transfers, Tottenham, and a little bit about Newcastle and see where we go. And I don't know if they're still beating Liverpool at the moment, actually. I know they're playing at the moment.
Well, yes. So here's that's funny. In Star Wars Satan, who is my guy, I love this dude. He says it's soccer, literally.
Yeah, that's true. It's soccer over here as well, Steve, to be fair.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it was soccer in England all the way until 1974 when the word soccer started becoming popular and it was associated with the United States. And that's when people over there in England were like, we can't have this. So we're just going to go back to calling it football, even though soccer is, of course, a British word. All right. So listen, yesterday, our beloved Tottenham Hotspur lost 3-0 at the G-Tech in the London Derby. It wasn't exactly the greatest way to start your campaign. But that being said, understand that the reaction was more or less an overreaction. And Derma, here's the thing. I understand. This is the first summer we actually spent serious money. And so fans look at the dollar figures and they're expecting a certain level of play. And when they didn't get it, all I heard for a good 4 hours was De Zerbi out, De Zerbi out, De Zerbi out. And I just want to say this one thing, Derma. If you are a part of the hashtag RDZ out, you can fuck off all the way. And I mean all the fucking way. Because the reality is, and this is the funniest thing too, Derma, because I think fans forgot that this summer we had a World Cup. And a lot of our key players were participating in the World Cup. Now, some were done early, some were done in the mid, and some actually played all the way into the final. But the reality is our key players that participated weren't around for a good chunk of the preseason. They didn't necessarily have a lot of time with training. Some of them missed the entire Australian tour. And then we had players that were recovering from injury. And what Roberto De Zerbi essentially ended up working with was a bunch of young players and, of course, players who are no longer with the clubs that ate a lot of those minutes. James Madison and Mateus Fernandez, one of our incomings, took slight knots there in the preseason. And, of course, De Zerbi did the right thing by protecting them and holding them out of certain games. And from that standpoint, that starting 11 yesterday was a direct result of all of that. And he had to go with an 11 that was 100% fit, that 100% could play. Yes, I wanted Mateus Fernandes to start yesterday, but that being said, if De Zerbi felt he couldn't go 60 minutes, and then it is what it is, right? We didn't have Pedro Porro. We didn't have Van de Ven. We didn't start Fernandes. We didn't start Madison. And of course, Sabinho was bought the day before, so he wasn't available. And of course, today, Omar Mamouche comes in. And we still have no idea if we're getting Cody Gakpo or yet another attacker before the end of this window. And so from that standpoint, Roberto De Zerbi did not have his first choice 11 yesterday. And that was a direct result. As a matter of fact, he actually came out yesterday in the post-match press conference and said, this group of players wasn't ready wasn't exactly ready. And I completely agree with that. They looked like they weren't ready. But that being said, over the course of the next couple of weeks, we are going to see something that will resemble our first choice 11. And then, of course, we get Mohamed Kudus coming back. We'll get Dejan Kulusevski back. My Tottenham bromance, Mr. Dejan Kulusevski. Of course, I love me some
What have you done without him, Steve?
I know.
You've been so sad without him. Look at the change in you. He's coming back, and I've seen you already come on.
I know. I cut my hair. I lost weight. You know what I mean?
You've done a Haaland. I see you've done a Haaland and cut all your hair.
Yeah, dude, I've been nothing without Decky. So, but that being said, it's like by the time in the next couple of weeks, we will see Roberto De Zerbi's first choice 11, and at that stage, we're going to kick on. But again, if you're one of those dudes that overreacted and said, Roberto De Zerbi out, you can fuck off all the way. And by the way, I don't like taking a piss out of our fans at all. But that being said, it's like, dude, seriously, take a deep breath and understand exactly where we're at.
Do you know what, Steve? 41 minutes it took for the first one to come into my watch along yesterday and said De Zerbi out. 41 minutes. And look, I can understand yesterday wasn't good enough. I understand that. We looked well off it. We looked like we did last season. We actually looked worse than we did last season. But look at Villa. Villa went and lost 4-0 at home to Brighton today. Look at Liverpool losing 2-1 to Newcastle, who everyone tipped to get relegated this year.
Right.
Look at United.
Look at United losing to Hull.
Look at Sunderland losing to Ipswich. So you can't tell me that just because it's Tottenham, we're the worst team in the league.
Right.
It's game week 1. I mean, I think we can judge where we are after 10 games, and we have a fair 100%. Idea where we are going. I look at it yesterday, and I did player ratings, and I was giving players 5s and 4s. I did give Gallagher a 2. I did give Bergville a 2. I give Solanke a 1 because he's just fucking useless. But he is. He spent more time in his arse, Steve, than he did actually running around. I mean, anyone thought he was a caterpillar at one point because he just kept falling to his arse. Was he drinking? But what really pissed me off is these fans, and I had it last season as well, going in on Archie Gray. Archie Gray yesterday was the youngest ever player to be captain of our great football club. He walked out there. It's not his fault De Zerbi picked him as captain, right? We haven't got a Mickey van der Ven. We haven't got a James Maddison wasn't fit. Porro's not ready to start playing yet. And I forget who the fourth one is. Who's the fourth captain? Ben Davis, right?
Ben Davis, yeah.
Right. But no, let's forget every other team player that's played bad. Let's just pick on Archie Gray. But nobody's picking on Mikey Moore for the performance that he put in yesterday, missing a couple of golden opportunities to actually score a goal.
He missed three solid opportunities.
Yeah. Not tracking back and helping Archie Gray when, and I don't know if you noticed it during the game as well in the first half, Steve, that Tonali had to go to the right to help out Archie Gray, which left a gap in the middle, which said to Brentford yesterday, said, well, thank you very much, Tottenham. We're going to exploit that all day long. That's where the first goal came from, through the gap in the middle. You got Tell helping Robinson on the other side, trying to do his defensive duties. I think he was one of the best players actually on the pitch. But for me, Steve, we got to start. Just stop it. You're overreacting is a joke. Yeah. You know, it's one game. I mean, I've been supporting Tottenham long enough, 46 years. This is my 46th season supporting Tottenham Hotspur. I'm 50 in February, right? I have seen worse starts than this. but everyone expects us to get an Ange start. I think that's the problem. The start we had under Ange, everyone expects us to have the same start every season. And even under Thomas Frank last season, Steve, it wasn't a great start either. But it's one game. For Christ's sake, we could beat Charlton on Wednesday and we could beat Newcastle next Saturday. And then, we're back into it then.
Yeah.
Just
even
patience.
even if we end up drawing Newcastle next week, I'm not gonna read too much into it. But that being said, by the way, Star Wars Satan 5588, my guy says, I hope Balogun goes to Tottenham so I can become a Tottenham fan. Well, so first and foremost, my guy, nothing is really stopping you from being a Tottenham fan. But if Balogun ends up with Spurs, I'm going to have to routinely change my shorts because I'll be so excited. And now I actually have a new shirt to buy. So I'll just say that. But yeah, no, here's the thing. I think it's fair. I think it's a little fair to take a piss out of individual players, especially if they didn't play well. But I didn't think Archie Gray really played all that terribly yesterday. There were a few times where he kind of overcommitted and got caught out, but it wasn't the worst performance by a right back that I've ever seen. But that's interesting that you mentioned Tonali because he actually had to cover a little bit of ground because Mikey Moore wasn't necessarily committed defensively, but also the fact that because Lucas Bergvall was routinely losing possession, he also had to cover other central areas of the pitch to make sure that A, we didn't lose possession, and B, that we can actually start the progression of that midfield diamond. And in that first half, you could tell that Bergvall was just not on that same page with Tonali. He wasn't even on the same level. And by the way, I believe one definitely resulted in a goal. One of those turnovers. But it is what it is. Yesterday's performance was just indicative of everything that happened throughout the summer. We just did not have our first choice 11 available yesterday, and it was painfully obvious. But I will say that there were times in the second half we looked a little bit better. We were getting forward, we were creating chances. But that being said, we got put to the sword really quick in that second half when they scored off the set piece. We had defensive mistakes where we're just not marking anyone. And it just was what it was. But that being said, you turn the page because we have Charlton Athletic midweek, and then we have Newcastle. On the following weekend. But what I will say is, you're absolutely right about that. It is,
But at least also, Steve, just very quickly, at least he had the guts and gumption to come out and do a press conference afterwards and speak to the press.
Of course.
I can't remember Romero doing that at all last season, bar once or twice. And Vicario did it, to be fair to him. Vicario did it. Van de Ven did it. Other players did it, bar the captain. He's 19 years of age. But again, it's easy to pick on a non-young Tottenham player. We never pick on one of our own. But we would pick on another young player, like a Bergvall. And he didn't have a great game yesterday. But one thing, Archie Gray stood up there. I'm going to go out and speak to the press. I'm the one I'm going to put my neck out there. And that shows more maturity. And that's why he's been picked one of the captains, not other players, to be fair.
Yeah. I don't, and by the way, I don't have a problem with Archie Gray as being a part of the leadership, because here's the thing. If you are a young kid, but you are mature and you're absolutely a professional, but that being said, your teammates actually look at you with an air of respect, I think that actually kind of says a lot about the character of a guy like Archie Gray. And so from that standpoint, that's the reason why I have a tremendous amount of respect for him. But understand he's also in that age group where he's still developing himself as a player, right? And so it's not like we're looking at an end product with a guy like Archie Gray. But again, Dermot, sometimes I find this overreaction just so exhausting to the point where sometimes I just don't want to engage. You get what I'm saying? Yeah. I think you're on mute.
I'm just looking to see how old Tony Adams was when he was named captain. But I do as well. It's just absolutely ridiculous, and I just don't get it. Is it just moaning for moaning's sake? Tony Adams was 21 when he was named Arsenal captain.
I think it's a combination of we haven't seen a lot of trophies in the last 25 years, right? And so I think that's part of it. I think there's a lot of apathy when it comes to this club. I think a lot of it is the fact that we just weren't spending compared to our big six rivals. And I also think when we finally did spend this summer, I think our expectations went entirely through the roof. So when you see these type of performance, your first initial reaction is to look for somebody to blame.
I understand that, and you're right. It is. It's the first thing. It's his fault. It's his fault. But we need to step back and just look at reality. And maybe these overseas tours, Steve, are not the thing. Maybe these overseas tours are more hassle. They're good money for the club, but for players, there's not. And also, when you look at the extended World Cup, how many teams in the Premier League this weekend that had a lot of players playing in World Cups haven't won?
Yeah, that's
what to me.
I think that was a big problem, right? Because it was a World Cup year. I don't necessarily think they should have went on I guess you can call it a world tour. What I will say is that I don't have a problem with it, right? Because generally speaking, we actually have most of our players involved when it comes to these type of tours, and there's no need to necessarily worry about that. I think with the World Cup and the fact that we had a lot of players involved, and then of course, as soon as their World Cup was done, they go on their off-season break, right? So they were given extended breaks, and a lot of these guys were just not involved in that tour. And so from that standpoint, a lot of these guys weren't able to work with some of the players that were available, and so there was no chemistry, there was no continuity involved, and that played. And me personally, I think that played. That played into the decision of De Zerbi yesterday to the point where he couldn't pick his 11. But we did get news. We did get news today, a little bit earlier today from Fabrizio Romano that Spurs are welcoming in one Omar Mamouche to the club. So Spurs bring in the striker that they had been wanting for the last couple of months. So congratulations to Roberto De Zerbi. But I also want to say that this is actually a good piece of business because the deal is an initial loan for the season. And I believe there's a mandatory clause, a £50 million mandatory clause, a buy clause that will probably kick in at the end of the season. But also when you look at the price for Mamouche, I think £50 million seems about right. I think that's actually, it's not expensive. It's not, considering, for instance, like if they went out to go get Flo Balogun, that would have been 55 million euros, right? So it seems to be right in that price range where that kind of makes sense.
And as I said yesterday, Steve, in the show with Dave, I did say his medical was booked for Monday, and we did get confirmation for that as well. And I did say that deal would happen. It's the deal that needed to happen, Steve. If you look at the strikers we have, it's the deal that needed to happen. What I am worried now, we do need another winger. I feel we need another one, and I feel we need a right back as well. I do feel that we do need cover. I think, and to hear me out, call me mad, but I've given a little bit of information, but I can see Bergville going. I can see Papa Sarr's going. Papa Sarr is leaving Tottenham. He's already been told. He's transfer listed. He's deleted everything off his Instagram. Bergville will go. But Bergville would go to Forest, and by the end of the window, Morgan Gibbs-White will be in the Spurs shirt. That's what I'm hearing at the moment.
That's interesting. And
I don't
by the
know
way,
how you feel about that, but
I think what it says to me that number one, that James Maddison is not necessarily like there has to be some concern about James Maddison's fitness, and because we don't get Xavi back for a while, the only center attacking mid that we currently have right now is Gallagher. And we saw yesterday that Gallagher, I'm not going to say that he's not up for it, but he cannot be a starting 10 for this team, right? So there is going to be a need for an upgrade at that position because it's going to allow cover and it's going to allow De Zerbi the opportunity to rotate Maddison in. So you're not necessarily dependent on James Maddison because, again, you have to be worried about his fitness levels. And I wouldn't have a problem with that. But the interesting thing, though, is that I think De Zerbi has said. That that right back is not going to be a priority. Now, I would probably assume that if one comes available, they'll make a deal for one. But you have to figure that Pedro Porro is probably going to play like 95 to 98% of the time out there on the right.
So.
And here's the thing: like in the first half of the season, before we hit the January window, I would probably assume that Archie Gray's contribution to the right back position is going to be very minimal. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so from that standpoint, I don't have a problem with Archie Gray covering until we get to January, because maybe that would be a better time to bring in a right back at that time. But there's also the possibility of injury as well too with a guy like Pedro Porro.
Yeah. Right.
Because he did play an extended World Cup, and obviously fitness. He's working his way back into fitness. So maybe if a right back comes available and it's the right price, they'll probably bring him in. But I do agree with you. I still believe that this club definitely needs another winger through the door. As much as I like Matisse Tell, I would probably assume for the time being, if Cody Gakpo is not that guy, I'm sure you know a little bit more about that than I do. That is the name that gets bandied about. So if we get Cody Gakpo, I think that solves the problem. But in the meantime, your outside wingers are going to be Matisse Tell on the left and Savino on the right until we actually get some and we get some clarity on Mohamed Kudus and Deki when they come back, and then obviously those two will man the right hand side. But I would probably assume in the short term, bringing in another winger still has to be a priority.
Yeah, I do, and I actually got it a bit wrong. It's Gallagher that's under pressure, not Bergville. Gallagher for Gibbs White. That could be the change. Now, I'm not saying it's a swap for swap, but if we get a good offer in for Gallagher, he's now under pressure because he didn't play well yesterday. Look, on Gakpo, there's a lot of conflicting reports at the moment. I mean, even from the people I use, one of them is saying it's not going to happen. I'm also hearing from other people it is going to happen. So it's very conflicting at the moment. He did start today for Liverpool.
Yeah.
But Omar did come on for Manchester City afterwards. And then as soon as the game finished, here we go, done deal. I just wonder if this is going to be the same. Now, we've got a week left, Steve, for the window.
Yep.
This is going to be, I think, the busiest week in Tottenham's history. Transfers under ENIC. And also, there is a rule that nobody realised this. We had to wait 45 days, I think, to sell a player to get going again after we bought Tonali. I think there's a rule in there in the Premier League, or if you buy a player of somebody, you have to. I think there's a 45-day rule. Now, I will find out that rule, and next week I will explain to it more because it will be the day before deadline day. But I think Tottenham have done this window absolutely perfectly. They've went hard at the beginning. They've got some players out. They've restocked, they've rechecked, and now they're pushing for the end. And I think it's perfect. What I do feel, though, to be honest, is the transfer window should have shut on Thursday. And then that's it. So when the season starts, your window shuts. But going on the transfers, Steve, prices have gone through the roof. Premier League to Premier League is absolutely inflating like no one's business. And you cannot tell me, as much as we all love Tonali, he's not a £100 million player. You can't tell me that Anderson from Forest to Man City is a £116 million player. These players are not worth what clubs are paying for them at the moment. But if you look at, we go to Europe when we sold Romero for 30 million. We sold Jed Spence for so much as well. It's a different set of ball games. So the question I want to ask you, Steve, is: are we heading towards the transfer bubble busting? It's a bit like an economy. Do you know what I mean? If one bit of the economy overheats, it affects the rest of the economy.
Right.
Are we heading towards that? Is the transfer sort of bubble overheating a little bit? Because the prices this year have been mental.
Yeah, the interesting thing is that it's the caliber of player that is being signed for these exorbitant wages, right? So when I see when I see, and I think I might have mentioned this to Dave as well too. It's like when I see £100 million price tag, I'm also thinking that that's going to be coming with 25 goals and 15 assists. You know what I mean? We're talking about top level production. But that being said, the interesting thing, like I thought Sandro Tonali would be in that 80 to 100 million pound range. I didn't necessarily think it would eclipse 100. But the interesting thing is like it was the Morgan Rogers deal to Chelsea that had me thrown a little bit, you know. And by the way, Morgan Rogers, good player, you know, good player. I'm not saying that, you know, I'm not saying that he's a scrub by any means, but I think he went to Chelsea for 138 million, which is, I don't know, like maybe you disagree with this, but I always feel like, you know, I think his market value was like maybe 85 million pounds, maybe 90. But that being said, for a player of that caliber, that was a little much. When you look at Mateus Fernandez, you know, where you know, for me, his market value was somewhere in that 50 million pound range, and all of a sudden he comes for 85. Sandro Tonali, again, 80 million pound valuation, he goes for, you know, just a little over 105 million pounds. Anthony Gordon to Barcelona for 80. Bruno Guimaraes going for like what, damn near 90 when his value was somewhere, I think it was somewhere in the 70 million pound range. And so from that standpoint, and again, good players. I'm not taking anything away from. Their talents, but when you look at market value for what they're being sold, it almost feels like, and back in the day, I used to have this little joke about the English tax, but really it's actually, you know, if anything, it's a Premier League tax where you have teams that are saying, listen, ideally we want these players to go elsewhere, not in the Premier League, but if the Premier League team comes in, especially if they're a rival, they're going to have, like, we're going to have to make them pay in order to get those services, right? And so these clubs are overvaluating their players, and in return, teams are bent over the barrel because if they want these services, they're going to have to pay a premium. And what's going to end up happening, in my estimation, is players like Archie Gray, players like a Lucas Bergvall, young players that have high ceilings now are going to start going for 50, 60 million pounds when really they should be somewhere in that 30 to 40 million pound range. What's going to end up happening is you're going to see overall expenditures rise for players that should not be even remotely going for top dollar, especially for players that really don't have the CV, you know, to justify some of these transfer records. And eventually, what's going to end up happening is you're going to start seeing the middle of the Premier League shop elsewhere, which in some regards they already have. Right? When you look at Crystal Palace, you look at Brentford, you look at Bournemouth, they're not buying in the Premier League.
No,
because they're not going to sit here and well, it's not that they can't afford it. It's just, it's more or less, it's not worth it to them, because the idea is, especially if you're one of those type of teams, you're thinking about the resale value of these players. And if you're looking at a Premier League player and you know, he's got a 55 million pound evaluation, market valuation, and the team is asking for 80. Well, now all of a sudden you put yourself behind the eight ball, because in 3 years when you move them on, you're not going to get 120 million euros or pounds for that player. There's a potential you might be selling at a loss. So it's not worth it for those teams to be shopping in the Premier League. And the same could be said for Spurs and Arsenal. You know, you look at some of and I think there's Arsenal is about to sell somebody to Al Hilal. And it looks like very possible that they might have to take a loss on it as well too. And so that's the biggest, you know, that for me, that's the biggest thing. And that's one of the biggest reasons why I didn't want to get Savinho, because it's a contract. Because if it doesn't work out, it's going to be a contract that's going to be virtually impossible to move.
Yeah, I mean, also another one as well, like Morgan Rogers going from the Ollie Watkins going from the Premier League to Saudi Pro League. It's just some of these transfers to me don't make sense, Steve. And you look at Morgan Rogers, you're right. He's not worth that. Anderson wasn't worth 116 million. I'm sorry. He's a very good player. But for me, he's 70, 80 million at most. And
Yeah, well, I mean,
feel,
and the same could have been said for Jack Grealish and Declan Rice as well too. Yeah,
well, he was the one that started it all. Jack Grealish was 100 million, and to be fair, he's never rarely hit the heights at Man City that he hit at Aston Villa. And I just feel that football has lost its moral compass, its soul, it's mad. And it's right, the richer teams are getting richer, but the poorer teams, there's a bigger gap now between the top six to the midfield to the bottom. And what chance has a Hull, has a Coventry, Ipswich got of competing and staying in the Premier League when they can't buy players because they haven't got the money to do so, and when they do, they put themselves into so much debt. You look at Aston Villa; they had to put themselves into so much debt just to qualify for the Champions League. They were running at 96% of their income on wages, and then suddenly they win to get the Champions League. But what happens if they don't? What happens if they don't qualify for Champions League this year? How much money?
They pull a Leeds. The same thing happened with Leeds back in the day, right? And it virtually sunk them. Now, I think you can say that it definitely worked out, but now they're up against their cost controls. They're up against their PSR, and they actually had to move players. They absolutely had to move players this summer. Where a team where a Big Six club will probably have the wherewithal to retain those players. But here's where I'll push back a little bit, because some of those, you're right when it comes to the rich getting richer within the Premier League, but those mid-tier teams, your Brightons, your Bournemouths, your Fulhams, they've stopped shopping in the Premier League because of that, right? But they're still doing a very good job of recruiting, just not in the Premier League, right? So they're still able to find talent. Like, the interesting thing was, Bournemouth is a very good example of this, right? Because this whole summer, we were allegedly in for Eli Junior Krupi this entire summer, right? Well, he was bought from a League Two side just the year before, right? And now all of a sudden, I think he was bought for 13 million euros, and then all of a sudden, you're after a 13 goal season, all of a sudden now the resale value on a dude is now somewhere in that 80 million pound range. So, these mid-table teams still very much have the ability to recruit, scout, identify, and still be able to sell players on, and still be able to to make very good profits. But as far as like competing for a Champions League spot, it's virtually impossible relative to the revenue in which they're able to operate. 100%.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you look here between, I'm trying to find it. So, the top 10, right, of Premier League clubs, how much they've spent this year. I'm just trying to find the top. Right. So Tottenham are the front. We've spent 228 million, but we've had an income of 141.5 million. So 87 million to this point net spend before the Savinho goes on to that, and before, Omar is later down the line. Coventry City have spent 122 million, but only an income of 4.5 million. So that's a net spend of minus 117.5 million. Ipswich Town have a net spend of a minus 136 million. Arsenal has spent nearly 200 million with a net spend of minus 156. Chelsea have a net spend of minus 210 million. So even the likes of Coventry and Ipswich are trying to spend 122 million, and Ipswich spend 152.5 million. But look how much debt they're in. What happens if they get relegated? What happens if they go down? And I know they get the parachute payment, but what happens if they don't come straight back up? And these clubs can't hold this debt. This is where I think transfer fees within the Premier League is getting completely out of control. We need a transfer cap. We need, as teams, you cannot spend more than this. You cannot sell a player more than that price. Because if we keep carrying on the way we're going, Steve, and teams keep spending the way they're spending, if there's a major recession around the world, which does affect football as well, because banks will be tightening their belts, banks will be looking to come back into loan, the teams that are so much in debt are going to struggle. And it'll be very soon, maybe not in my lifetime, but maybe in the next 50 to 40 to 50 years, right? In that time, between now and 50 years' time, a Premier League club will go bust within the Premier League. If we don't sort it out now, Steve.
Well, the interesting thing is, they have the new independent football regulator that is specifically designed to, I guess you can say, make sure that there's going to be sustainability within the English game.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing, when you look at overall net losses from division to division, when it comes to the Premier League, losses really aren't. I'm not going to say that they're not important, because they are. But the interesting thing when you talk about the big six clubs, their revenues are so great that they're going to be able to, a short-term loss is not going to be something that's necessarily going to affect them, because they can always sell players. You know what I mean? So if a team is 150 million pounds in debt relative to their income, they can always move players. You know what I mean? It's not going to be. It's not going to be that big of it. It's not going to be that big of an issue for those. But for the rest of the teams in the Premier League, your Brightons, your Bournemouths, your Fulhams, what they're going to end up doing is they're going to be even stricter when it comes to their budget. Yeah. They're not going. We've already seen a trend over the last 10, 15 years. They're not going to be shopping in the exact same areas as some of their other counterparts in the Premier League. These clubs are going to tighten their belts even further. And I would probably assume you're going to see a little bit more emphasis on player development via their academy, right? Not only for potential future first team players, but also as modes of profit as well too. They're going to be on I guess you can say their wage list on a year-to-year basis is always going to be more geared toward profit than it is going to be potentially challenging for European spots, which put fans in a very peculiar predicament, because fans want to see ambition. But that being said, it's like if you're the owner of Fulham, your model is not necessarily going to be geared for European play. Maybe once in 10 years you might have a season where you kick up the table and you have a good season like Sunderland last year. You know what I mean? But for the most part, you're going to be shopping. You're going to be shopping in a different store, and your whole model is going to be geared around profit, not necessarily wins and losses. But the interesting thing, I was going over this just a couple days ago, that before all these PSR models came into play, it's interesting. The total losses per club in EFL League One, on average, before these PSR models were $1 million in loss. After the PSR models came in, the average loss per club now is in the $6 to $7 million a year range. Now, some people will say it's because the price of players have gone up, potentially, but it's also because there is more money that's trickling down to the lower leagues that are allowing owners to spend a little bit more. But that being said, what we're seeing is more teams a little bit looking to get that promotion. So they're willing to gamble a little bit, but they're not gambling in a way that it's going to long term affect them, because once you get that promotion, the aim is for stability in that upper league, or I guess the word is consolidate in that upper league. But the reality is, it's like you go from the championship, you go from League One to League Two, even into the non-league games. Average losses per season continue to climb. And it's kind of interesting considering all these PSR and independent football regulators that are essentially banging the drum. But that being said, you also look at the PFA as well too, the union. these union folks don't give a shit if a club goes bust. They're just looking for the most money for their players. Too.
I've just found the site, right? And I'm just saying it's the Premier League net spend since 22-23 transfers, right?
Okay.
And the top 2 clubs, or the top 4, right? Or say top 5, is Chelsea, Tottenham, Arsenal, Man United, Liverpool, Man City's there, okay? These are all in dollars, by the way. All in the billions. Chelsea have spent $2.31 billion since 22-23. They've received $1.21 billion, but their net spend over that time period between 22-23 and the 26-27 current window is $1.11 billion. Now, Tottenham, on the other hand, have spent $1.3 billion. That works out to be 953 million pounds, right? They received 428.2 million, so their net spend is around $875 million. If you go down to the bottom of that, look at Leeds, right? I'm taking Leeds for example.
Yep.
So Premier League net spend since 22-23, right? They have spent over a time period between then to now 476.9 million. Their net spend is 95.6 million. But if you look at a Leeds, you look at a Sunderland, right? Coventry, say Sunderland, right? Who got into Europe last season. $270.5 million they've spent since 22-23. They've recruited 130 million, but that's a net spend of 140.3. Steve, I'm saying this now as a fan. Which club can sustain? I mean, you look at Chelsea's numbers. A club that can sustain, even Man United, 1.16 billion they've spent since 22-23. They received 367.4 million. So that leaves them in a net spend of 797.6 million. But how can a team survive on spending that much money? That money is, you can't even compute it.
Because their commercial losses aren't greater than the total valuation of what their club is, right? And that's the reason that, that's the biggest reason why clubs go bust, right? That's the biggest reason why I think Leicester fans right now are flipping out, right? Because of their, because that's probably going to be the closest to a club going bust. I think the last bust team that got liquidated was Barry, and that's exactly what it is. It's like when your losses are greater than what your club is valued at, you put yourself in an impossible situation because nobody's going to want to buy it, right? And so from that standpoint, from that standpoint, that's the reason why we're probably not going to see one of these big clubs go bust. But that being said, it's that is the worry where if a team has those type of losses where there is no immediate fix to it, and on a year-by-year basis, those losses continue to climb. You put yourself in a very peculiar predicament because the first thing that's going to end up happening is that your club is going to go into administration, and again, if your losses are greater than the total valuation of your club, there's no one way you're going to be able to fix it. And I don't care what any independent administration firm that comes in to try to solve the problem, that club is going to get liquidated. That's the biggest fear for a team like Leicester City, because when you look at the things that they were trying to do at the Premier League level, they had that fancy new training center that cost them on average, I think it's $15 million a year just to maintain. And then you look at their cavalier spending, Leicester City is a team on the brink, which is why we're starting to hear that they're actually trying to sell their training facility now because they can't operate. They can't operate it. They can't facilitate it, right? So the interesting thing about this is it would take a lot for a Premier League team to go bust, and it would take more than what happened to Leeds back in the day, where you spend well over your means, it doesn't work out, and you suffer so many relegations where you find yourself out of the football league.
Mm.
Like, to me, that would have to happen. And I know you and I were talking about it on a couple shows ago, where me personally, I actually can see Leicester going down again. Because
I can.
Yeah.
There's
no immediate fix to it. There's just no immediate fix to it.
And people don't care. It's all about money, and the money vultures will take the money. I think the worst thing ever to happen to the game, Steve, is football agents, because I think they're the biggest vultures out there. Because the more money that these players go for, the bigger cut they get. And the bigger cut they get means bigger revenue for them. So I think in the long run, I think there has to be some regulation on player agents. And I think football in itself has got to get its house in order. It's got to get that in order. Because the longer they leave it, and I think the horse is already bolted the stable. I think it's too late now. In some regards, I think it has. So
I hate to say this. I agree with you when it comes to agents, but and you're probably not going to like me saying this, but I also think it's also the players' union as well too.
Yeah,
because
I agree.
Because again, the players' union doesn't give a shit if an owner overspends or underspends, just as long as their representatives are getting paid. But that being said, they're fighting against sustainability, because it means that fewer of their membership are actually going to be able to get paid. They don't care. The players union does not care if a team goes bust, which is insane in my opinion. But here's the other thing, right? I think there are 82 members of the English Football League. Okay. 47 of them are currently up for sale right now. There are more clubs for sale right now than there are clubs that aren't, and they believe in the useful idiot ideology, where if it doesn't necessarily work for one, there's always going to be some idiot to come along that's going to buy the club. And as long as there is a useful idiot around that wants to get into football, there is always going to be a need for buying players. And so that's why the players union is fighting against sustainability, because they don't want sustainability. They want players to be able to make as much money as possible. And that's where agents come in, because agents are the vultures. Agents are the ones that want to make sure that their clients get the highest paid, because it means more money for them in their pocket, right? And so you actually have two entities that are working against football. Now, if you told me, like, one of the biggest things that the players union should do is rally against the schedule, because I think there's too much football. I can't believe I'm the one to say it, but I think there's too much football when it comes to
I agree.
When it comes to the European calendar, and when you factor in European competition and these cup competitions, and then there's international duty for a lot of these players. We're going to get to the point where these players are playing 80 games in a season with very little turnaround. And that should be what the players union should be fighting against, not against sustainability. Sustainability means that clubs are happy. Clubs are on a year-to-year basis going to be able to make more revenue, which means ultimately more money for their clients, right? To sit here and have this attitude that you don't give a shit about individual clubs, and you don't care if clubs go bust, it just makes the union look like shit.
It does. And then they talk about player welfare and all the games they're playing and too many games. Well, you're not doing a lot to stop it, are you? And then you go onto the thing of FIFA. FIFA being the world governing body, they make the rules with other people, but they could stop it quite easily. They could stop it and say, no, this is what we're going to do. We're not going to expand the World Cup. We're going to keep the World Cup as it is. And we're going to give players longer break. 89 days from the Everton to Brentford yesterday. That was from the end of the season to the start of the season. And then, of course, you had this extended World Cup. A lot of these players only got 3 weeks off. That is not a lot of time for a body to recover. You need a month to recover by playing consistent football. If you're a first team player and you're playing game in, game out, game win, say you're playing 60 games a year, right? You need a month for your body to relax, to recover, to recuperate. And then you start going back into it slowly. But there's too much. And this is why this going away to Australia, that's more traveling on the players' bodies. But clubs don't mind this because all clubs can see is money. All clubs can see we're going to expand into that market. We're going to expand into that market. And Steve, to be fair, what's it going to take? Is it going to take, and I don't mean to sound over dramatic like this, but what's it going to take? A player dying on the football pitch in a Champions League game or a Premier League game or a Championship game, or especially Premier League or Europe, where the player's body says,
I've had enough. Or a rash of long-term injuries to star players, right?
Exactly.
You're talking about ACL tears. You're talking about clean tears of the hamstring, where a lot of these top players are out for long extended periods of time, where UEFA and FIFA can't market these players because they're not available, right? I think you're absolutely right. It would be like I would have no idea what happened if a player collapsed on the pitch because of overwork. That would be like the worst possible scenario. And I would probably think you're right. Like when it comes to some of these governing bodies that are literally trying to put more games in a calendar season, that would probably be the only way where they would stop and be like, maybe this might just be a little too much.
Agree, Steve. I agree. But sorry, bud, I'm going to have to jump because I've got to be somewhere in a minute. So I'm going to have to jump. Okay. But look,
all right,
we're back next week. And I can't wait because I enjoyed tonight's conversation. I hope we can continue on to next week, Steve. I really enjoyed it. It's a conversation I think that needs to happen. And I think a lot of people are not talking about it because they just think, well, we won't bother. We'll push it down the road. But I just went in this point. As you said, organizations like FIFA, UEFA, the Premier League, all they think about is money. There's no player welfare there. There's no looking after the clubs. There's no looking after the fans. And especially the Premier League. And maybe hope we continue this next week. But look at the times, kickoff times for fans going around the country. Last season, we played Everton. We played Villa away, 7:00 on the Sunday evening.
Yep.
What with all the fans that have to get from there to Birmingham and back again and get up 5:00 the following morning to go to work? There's no consideration for fans. It's all about money, keeping the TV companies happy, and keeping the financial people happy. There's nothing. I look at NFL in America, right? And I look at that thinking, you play the games all at the same time nearly. You have 3 segments on Sunday and the Monday, from Thursday to a Monday. You play, you're playing the Sunday at a certain time. Then you got the evening game. There's Monday night football. Right. And I suppose, look, I'm ready to get into the NFL this year, but like when you get into the playoffs, it's done correctly. You look after your fans because your fans have to travel further distances to go to one match to another. It's a big place, America. But you look at the Premier League, they don't care. They just don't give a shit.
It's interesting because if you're on the West Coast here in the United States, you have a 10 o'clock and a 1 o'clock kickoff, right? And then Sunday night football, begins like at 5:30, 6 o'clock, and then it's wrapped up by no later than 8:30, 9 o'clock, right? So you're not in a position where you have to stay up till 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock. Here on the East Coast, it's 1 o'clock, 4 o'clock, I believe. And then, the Sunday night games, like, again, from like, 6 to whatever. And so, that's the thing, the National Football, but they've been having this schedule for years. But here's the interesting thing. College football went by the way of what the Premier League does currently, right? Because back in the day, like most college football teams are kicking off at noon. You know what I mean? Like they would have midday Saturday games, and you would have maybe a couple primetime games. But for the most part, most college football teams kicked off right at noon. And now all of a sudden, most everything now is in prime time. But that being said, all of this is designed to facilitate television broadcasts, right? Because primetime spots means that these TV companies can sell ad space for higher higher amounts, and because the Premier League is exactly what it is, the Premier League has will have no problem doing that. You know what I mean? We'll have no problem accommodating these television broadcast companies by moving it. For me, that's what I don't like on a Sunday evening. Having a 7:00 start on a Sunday evening, especially for fans that travel, that's not necessarily conducive. Me personally, I don't have a problem if it's on a Friday or Saturday night. If you want to have primetime games, because you still have Sunday, available to do it. But on a Sunday night, or even multiple games on a Monday night, and if you're in London and you're playing Brighton on the South Coast, you have to travel to Brighton, and you have to be at work the next morning. It's not conducive for your fans. I would agree with that. 100%. But all right, Dermo, last words real quick, because I know you got to jump off. You got a show coming up as well too. What does it look like on THFC Tottenham Till We Die this week? You're on mute, bud. You're on mute.
There's a bit of noise in the background, and I didn't want to come over on the stream, so I'm muting myself just in case if you can hear or not. But we've got the recap show tonight at 10, and then tomorrow we've got the post-match debrief. We're going to go over the Brentford game. Then Tuesday, we've got all the build-up to Charlton on Wednesday. Charlton, then we've got the watch-along and everything else. And then Thursday, podcast, play ratings podcast, and then Friday, all the build-up for the Newcastle stuff. And then on Monday, on the 1st of September, we've got Deadline Day Madness, where I'm going on from 4 in the afternoon. We do it every year now, me and James. We're going from 4 in the afternoon to close the bitters. So I'm doing 4 to 11, transfer Deadline Day Madness. Hopefully, Steve, if you're around, you're more welcome to pop on. Come and join us on Deadline Day. I'll send you the link in the evening. But got a lot coming up. And then after that, I think I'm going to go into a hole somewhere and just sleep for 24 hours after that. And then, all the build up then for Spurs. And then we'll get to the first international break and see where we are. But Steve, thanks for having me on again. Love doing this podcast, and I can't wait till next week.
Absolutely. And of course, tonight we will be back with the Sunday night conversation with Jeff Lageson of Prost International. The Sounders actually made a transfer. We're going to be talking about it.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it reeks of sheer desperation, as the Sounders most likely will miss the playoffs this year. So we will have that conversation tonight. And of course, later this week, we will be back as we discuss Tottenham, as we get ready. Actually, the post Carabao Cup analysis, and then of course getting ready for the weekend against Newcastle United. A lot of good things coming down the pike here on Stateside Footy. Please make sure you hit that like and subscribe button, also hit the notification bell, and also head on over to Derma's channel at THFC Tottenham Till We Die, and make sure that you show Derma some love as well too. So I believe the link is in the description for you guys to do it. So definitely do that. So all right, guys, enjoy the rest of your Sunday. I'm sorry Spurs couldn't have made your Saturday better, but that being said, we will definitely beat Charlton Athletic on Wednesday, and we most certainly will absolutely dummy Newcastle on the weekend. So plenty of wins coming down the pike for our beloved Spurs. So all right, guys, take care. Have a great day.
Come on, you Spurs.
Kulusevski forever.
Rusted goalposts under faded